When most people talk about trendy fashion, they're usually referring to international designer brands or cutting-edge street fashion. Few would be looking to a 120-year-old Imagewear company whose heritage is supplying t-shirts with team logos or polos embroidered with corporate branding. However, they would be overlooking a company that has pivoted to serve the fast-growing demand for show-stopping garments that just happen to represent teams, universities, and corporations. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Today I'm speaking with Susan Ganz, CEO of Lion Brothers. Some of the most fantastic fanwear and imagewear is being created by Lion Brothers. In recent years, the company has been able to parlay its foundation as a producer of personalized apparel into a key role in the fast-growing direct-to-consumer supply chain. Add to that Lion Brothers' ongoing investment in both creative talent and new technology, and you've got a company that makes garments that consumers love and is able to provide buyers with critical on-demand service. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that are a must-buy, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. Spin Expo provides a well-edited selection of top-quality products that are filled with creativity, as well as truly unique trend information. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Now join me in finding out how Lion Brothers is building the next chapter in its century-old success story. Happy to have you on the podcast, Susie. Thank you so much for joining me on A Seat at the Table. Imagewear has grown from basic items with a logo and embroidered or screen printed to really dynamic garments. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've been developing at Lion Brothers. I've seen samples of some of your products and they look fabulous. So I'm looking forward to hearing about what you've been doing. And what are some of the biggest shifts that you've seen over the past 5 years in imagewear? What's changed? How has the sector evolved?
The sector's evolved tremendously. And I'd say let's start with just retail in general, start with the consumer, right? Because there are so many different shifts that reflect really changes in the industry in terms of both imagewear and general apparel, which is there's the channel change, which is the shift to online, and with it, the evolution in terms of what consumers buy as well as how they buy it. But under COVID, the pivot to D2C meant a generational shift in the course of a year. And then big brands, at least here in the United States, were already under threat from Amazon and its prime free shipping. So the direct-to-consumer pivot was the inevitable battle for the hearts and minds of the consumer. And when you look at how that then impacts things like imagewear, folks, their strategies were already in motion, but it solidified the strategic change. And what we saw in terms of how this impacts us is people were looking for new already. And so for us, the ability to not only provide things that look great in terms of brand value, but also be able to help in supply chain speed and flexibility has really made a tremendous difference for our clients. And so you get to do both. You get to have these beautiful different forms of apparel identity, but you get to deliver them in a way where it's adding real strategic value at this time. This legacy issue of markdowns, I think that one of the things that COVID brought to a head was, okay, bricks and mortar shut down in the United States, bricks and mortar shut down in other countries, and retailers were left with inventory, just mounds and mounds of inventory, saying, wow, this problem that I've had every year just became an existential problem. And so for us, the notion of how we mix things with regard to beautiful looks that can be heat applied, that allow people to decorate and customize, either in factory and distribution centers or in store to provide a customer experience, now creates real value, supply chain value, because of its flexibility and enhancement. So I think that's one of the areas in terms of Imagewear itself expanded in terms of many categories, from the licensed teams to corporate identity and career apparel to lifestyle to promotional items to those that cover resort and entertainment. Each of these are fairly large segments, but I think for us as those that supply those into these segments, the notion of how that's changed so significantly and what that means because of, again, the consumer change, the channel change and other has been quite meaningful.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Imagewear used to be basically uniforms or, like you said, team T-shirts, something quite simplistic, and now it's really become something far more complicated. How big is the market for everything that falls under that Imagewear umbrella these days?
How big? It's large. Yeah. In terms of each of these segments, again, licensed sports team, uniforms, fanwear, a large segment unto itself. Corporate identity, career apparel, uniforms, large segment unto itself. Lifestyle apparel now has become a large overlap with regard to Imagewear in terms of contemporary language. Promotional products are now part of Imagewear as we think about having some sort of expression or identity. And certainly the whole entertainment industry, as you have the influence of influencers, has become part of Imagewear. So I think that it's an expanded version, and it's a large market broken down into a number of segments based upon the venue, the channel, and the consumer, the connection of consumer.
Is any one of those subcategories looking like it's the big growth area, or are they all about on par?
I think that I'll say lifestyle is absolutely, growing by leaps and bounds. It's growing beautifully, even under COVID, interestingly. I would say that as venues open up, that we will see entertainment go back to being as part of a larger growth segment. We saw it prior to COVID, and I would suggest that entertainment itself in all forms is one of those segments where Imagewear will be a large part of what goes on in both physical and virtual venues. In terms of sports, the sports side is growing, and we see this change from what is physical sports, the traditional sports, if you will, to esports. So in all worlds, I think we see the notion of expansion of markets, and the expansion occurs with the integration of the physical and virtual lives that people are leading and how they see themselves as consumers.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because now someone would be wearing a team shirt when they're sitting at home and playing an esport.
Yes. And it may be an individual, or it may be a cluster or team, or it may be part of a larger community. So each of these require, who are you and how are you showing up? Are you showing up as Jane? Are you showing up as Jane as part of a team, or are you showing up as Jane as part of a larger community of things? And so as we think about sports, this notion of taking these larger communities and breaking them down about how they're working within a community becomes part of Imagewear as well.
And so the Imagewear actually becomes tied in with the community's identity.
Exactly. So identity here really becomes important. And the notion of, in this changeover from direct to consumer, one of the things that in the hearts and minds and connecting with the consumer is just that, which is, who am I and what does that mean and in what context? And so that's where the expansion of these things change a bit. So it's me as a consumer, as an individual, because I'm now purchasing a product that I want. And the brand is trying to understand, is it you as an individual? Is it you as something larger? What's your sense of belonging? And where does that reside, and how am I going to connect with you?
So in other words, the Imagewear, which identifies you as part of a community, has almost replaced the idea of status logos, which was a different form of identity. Do you see that, or am I off based on that?
I see it augmenting. I see it's a little bit like religion, where we all have this basis of religion, but it's how do I personalize my own notion of how I fit into a particular community. And I think that it'll be an interesting evolution in terms of how brands coalesce with the personalization of those brands. And there'll be a tension between how much flexibility and customization, if you will, personalization a brand allows for. What that then means. What are going to be the constraints? Does a brand want complete expression because the tools certainly exist to do that, or do they want to have boundaries in terms of who they are and what they want represented in the marketplace?
That's a really interesting point, because you're right. People want personalization, but on the other hand, you still have to maintain your brand identity so that if you let everybody do whatever they want with it, it no longer looks like your brand. Yes, where do you define that boundary?
I think that there's going to be, my guess is there'll be a lot of conversations around that. And it's not necessarily top of mind and consciousness today, but as the tools and the conversations become more and more available, I think that's going to be the discussion or contract between the brand and the consumer. What does the consumer want versus what the brand is willing to give?
Yeah, I think that's important. It's an audience first or a consumer first approach, but with some kind of guidelines.
That's right. And that's where we see that that the world has changed. The power before brands they've had so much, power over the consumer. And in this particular case, the consumer really, the equation has flipped where it really does become all about the consumer and the brands being a fulfillment partner to some extent.
Yeah, I think that's another important part of the equation, which is the fulfillment side of things, the ability to customize and, in a sense, localize that. You're able to get faster turnaround and so forth and more flexibility.
Yes, so the toolkit is changing, and the brands certainly want to inspire depending on what segment of the market they want to be able to inspire, they want to engage. But in essence, the interesting part will be, well, what will that mean in terms of how they engage, and to the extent of the earlier comment, those boundaries about how you're then going to supply consumers. So we already see it in terms of supply chain, changes, which is in terms of this personalization, the toolkit to be able to create smaller quantities and to be able to begin to get closer and closer supply and demand chains with greater alignment is already in motion. For us in customization, we use technology to be able to do that. And certainly over the next few years, the objective is to go from push-based strategies to pull-based strategies, be able to deliver goods on demand. And that's where we're headed. And I think that those that can supply goods in that kind of way, going down to a supply chain basis, will be successful. And those that don't, those that remain on push-based strategies will have some real challenges in the years ahead as the consumer really becomes the person you want to satisfy.
Exactly. I think that if you look at Imagewear from the way I suppose it was traditionally, it was basic garments that were then customized on the fly, which gave it more flexibility. Now, of course, it's become a bit more complex, but does it still offer you that opportunity to be able to create more basics that you have in stock?
Oh, yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about, traditional Imagewear, which is one can take a blank garment, a blank tee, a blank fleece of any silhouette, and with heat applied products can make it beautiful and in the stores and available without heavy inventory, and season in, season out, and reduce that risk of inventory risk or perishability. The tools that we've adopted to be able to deliver faster and faster, and our new tools that'll be coming out later this year, truly allow for on-demand customization. I think we'll just see a proliferation of tools that allow brands and their factory partners to be able to deliver that.
What are some of the top tools that you're using now?
Sure. Over the past few years, we've changed over to really tech-based, tech-enabled manufacturing. And so as we look closer and closer to be able to digitize our elements in production, it allows us to go direct to machine. And as we begin to do that, it really allows us to deliver in smaller quantities and economic order quantities of one. And we see this in the direct-to-garment printing business, where there's an example of one particular technology that's really changed and enabled all sorts of people to be able to now have goods for marketplaces. So as one looks at being able to serve goods in smaller quantities, direct-to-garment printing allows one to be able to create a 1 or 5 or 10 of something very efficiently and get it to a marketplace where the author, really doesn't have to, just is in charge of concept, but really doesn't have to be in charge of production or doesn't have to be in charge of, in the case of marketplaces, of distribution.
Yeah, it's interesting, that direct to consumer with particularly the t-shirt business, digital printing on that has, like you said, really been remarkable.
It has, and it'll continue to proliferate and flourish. But we'll see other technologies that enable folks to create more dimensional looks, over time. The direct-to-garment is a first-gen version of being able to decorate and customize digitally on demand. But what you'll see over the next few years is a whole host of tools that create dimensionality, that create beautiful looks that are far more complex, in augmenting legacy t-shirts or fleece.
What do you see coming soon? In other words, it might not be here, but as you said, there might be something coming towards the end of the year or possibly early next year.
So we're introducing a platform that allows us to create things that are quite beautiful, that is an augmentation to different looks that allows folks to customize. It's a platform we call TOM, which stands for Technically Optimized Manufacturing. And what it allows for is really a complete digital product that's delivered on demand. Jane, I promise you I'll send it in Q4 as it comes to market. right? But it allows brands to be able to, again, deliver goods on demand with beautiful color and to be able to really ramp up their supply chain in new ways.
Wow, really exciting. And I think that's just what the market needs because people right now are really concerned about having excess inventory. There's been a shift to more on demand, just in time and so forth, even before the pandemic. But if there's one thing that the pandemic has really driven home is the need to be able to have a lot of flexibility on the inventory side of things.
Everyone was hit as factories shut down, and we had the supply side in Asia, we had the demand side, and all over the world, and certainly in the United States. I think that every person who's in the industry experienced the impact of what inventory means. And I hope that the industry as a whole, and I do believe it does, has enough gumption to be able to change how we do things, because the toolkit is emerging to be able to change. The question is, does executive management have the right thought process in place to be able to consider what on-demand means as these tools evolve? Or is it, hey, same old, I'm going to look for lowest cost, not necessarily best supply chain flexibility? It's interesting to see what happens. We saw this during the Great Recession in '08, which is folks in the United States began to source and increase supply out of Central America. And when the recession hit, it then shifted back to lowest cost in Asia. Then as the economic status normalized or began to normalize, people began to rebalance their portfolio in terms of sourcing strategies. Here we have an opportunity to rethink our supply chains. The question is, will that pain be enough for us to take advantage of what this really means, or is in terms of being able to move good supply strategies forward? At some point, we will have the opportunity to flip from push-based to pull-based. The question is, what and how?
Exactly. So in terms of your supply chain at Lion Brothers, are there any key changes that you're making right now?
The biggest key change is we've certainly understood the impact of, I think one of the words is diversification. And what does that mean? For us, we've operated micro facilities in the United States for some time. We have facilities in Asia. But this notion of, for us, we philosophically looked at micros as the way to create decentralized manufacturing over time. We felt that if things are technology-based, that allows us to be able to create micros closest to factories or closest to customer over time. And I think that's a philosophy we'll continue to evolve with in terms of how we diversify. In terms of our own supply chains, we've certainly looked, deeply to say who are our supply base and what does that mean, and how do we also create some sort of safe space. But I think that this is the first time the notion of physical safety really came into being. Before it was more like economic safety, about tariffs, about other things. But this notion of physical safety for the first time, and in some cases political safety, has really accelerated some of the conversations around diversification.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think that there's been a lot of uncertainty, aside from the U.S.-China tariffs, but certainly there's potential tariffs elsewhere and other situations that could push people to move to other countries.
Yeah, yes. The loudest is certainly the U.S.-China, but it's not just U.S.-China. It really is global. And again, it's what's the approach for the future going to be? And I think, again, much of it begins with the consumer. It begins with the consumer backwards versus the push strategy of supply outwards. And my guess is they'll meet somewhere in the middle. What the consumer wants and needs versus the brands, how they're set up to supply retail and under these channel changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a delicate balance.
Absolutely. And it's not the conversations we hear. We're moving offices from here to here and here to here to here. But where the rubber will meet the road is as we begin to look at investment and what that means in terms of not everyone's supply chain, what that means in first order and second order supply chains. The thing that Asia's been helpful with is just these embedded supply chains all the way through. It's not right. So when we talk about nearshoring, it's not easy to nearshore. It's not easy to have the robust supply chain that Asia offers here in the United States or in Central America. It's just not available. And so there's a reality of the situation. Even if you want to, there's an inevitability of how long it takes, and how do I? Because again, you need a whole lot of partners to make that supply chain as robust as Asia.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's always been China's sort of a secret sauce, is that they've had all the components under one roof, really very centralized in clusters. And then other countries as well are able to go from fiber all the way through to finished garment. India has that capability, and certainly other countries, I think Indonesia is trying to develop that more robustly as well, to be able to have that mill development.
Absolutely. And part two is what's coming into play is these conversations around sustainability and compliance in terms of looking at fibers and where they come from. For us, the interesting thing in terms of new views of compliance and sustainability and how the two are beginning to become inextricably linked is something for the future as well, which is not just is this product made of cotton, but where does that cotton come from? And is that a place which is acceptable in global compliance and sustainability standards? It's getting to be more complicated. It's getting to be more complex as brands and their consumers are asking for transparency and visibility around where the derivatives are produced.
Very true. We hadn't really, maybe 5 years ago, a decade ago, you didn't have as much pressure from the consumer for that transparency. And people just wanted to see reasonably good quality. They assumed, or maybe they just didn't think about it at all, as to where things were being made or how they were being made. Now there's been a lot of focus from brands, even at the fiber level, and I know that, for example, U.S. Cotton just introduced their U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol to be able to certify that everything is grown the way it should be.
Yes, it's interesting you said that. So there are two aspects of that. One is the consumer now has a larger voice. The consumer has a platform, and would expect with with generations coming up, that voice is going to be, it's the amplitude, it's going to be loud, and that will affect brands and their supply chains. It becomes meaningful because, again, it's part of that relationship between brands and the consumers. In essence, you're beginning to create these economic social contracts. If you're meeting these criteria, not just for the goods themselves, but how you're approaching sustainability, how you're approaching compliance, all these things that the consumer become important. That voice is going to be responded to by the brand. And we see that. On the other hand, you have the basic stuff that you're suggesting with regard to the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. We recently had a raw material come into play here where it was a raw material we've been utilizing for years. And we were asked about in terms of customs, where does the cotton come from? And it was a legacy vendor, and we had to curtail, purchasing them from them because of the inability to be able to trace the specific area of where that cotton came from. As we create the requirements around traceability at a fiber level, clearly this is going to be part of the new in transparency along supply chains, and I think it will only continue.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that concept of total traceability, as well as how you're manufacturing, where you're manufacturing, has become one of the touch points in terms of that entire, what you might call, quality equation and total brand image.
Yes. So from a brand perspective, it's interesting because it is absolutely who the brand is and what they stand for. So that brand promise used to be about what it stood for, as an example, if it was about athletes or if it was about a particular consumer. And here that brand promise is not only about helping people become better athletes, but it may be about how we help people. And here's what that means in terms of our values. We're seeing the values actually being borne out in supply chains. Before, initially, it was borne out in things like social compliance, and now we're seeing it diversified and broadened and deepened. Expect that continues. And that'll be part of these ongoing protocols as a vendor and supplier. That these protocols, again, that are this social contract between the brand and the consumer, are pushed down to be able to ensure that the transparency, visibility, and other values are embedded in that supply chain.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're seeing as well. And it's not something that's just a trend. I think this is here to stay.
I think you're right on. You're right. It's be prepared. Right? That's the best thing because it's not whether we agree with it, disagree, or other. It is. It is, and it's our future. So that and being able to lead in that is something from our standpoint that we're thrilled to do. So as we look at things like we started out 120 years ago as an embroidery company, and being able to offer sustainable stitching, all of our entire raw materials of threads are at this point of core are made from recycled products. And we're thrilled to be able to incorporate that into our supply chain. But you can see what's coming, and as a maker, as a producer of things, we have choices. And I hope that folks take the opportunity to understand it's not whether, it's if you want to engage, this is what the evolution will be.
Yeah, very true. Right now, what's the biggest ask that customers have for you or for Lion Brothers these days?
Oh, great question. There are several asks. One, because of the time we're in, is around speed. The notion of, okay, I'm operating in an area of uncertainty, and so with that, I don't know what's gonna. The don't knows from their side, so we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to sell. We don't know. So from our side, being able to create supply chain flexibility and speed is one of those elements that's just essential. From the standpoint of, I love innovation. I love what you deliver, Lion. Can you please show us more? So I think that the notion of just continued innovation has become a mantra from the brands that we serve. Those are some of the bigger, smaller quantities. With this shift to direct to consumer and with data, there's a whole lot of market segmentation going on. And my guess is we're going to see increasing asks to satisfy long tails. In our business, they're asking for that toolkit for fast customization. And so that people can customize and personalize expediently and close to customer, close to sell-through. And another ask is really around sustainability. Again, as consumers have this stronger voice in the chain, as we've discussed, sustainability and compliance become larger components. So those are some of the asks that are on our chain. They are definitely thinking about the financial risk and how that one can bring back a toolkit to be able to mitigate that financial risk with a more flexible supply chain. And then what does that mean for the future in terms of things that can create brand value as well as how we serve customers given this channel change?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are wanting multi-dimensional services from their suppliers now, whereas before it was really just very price focused and then it moved to price plus speed. And now people really want a very comprehensive package to support them.
Yes, you're right on. So it started with being manufacturer, and then it went to design manufacturing, and then it went to design plus to innovation, and then it went to. So I think that's the world we're in, which is it's a more set of comprehensive things that one needs to offer, and I think it'll both consolidate the marketplace, but I think there'll also be new entrants, and that's exciting because innovation comes from all places. It comes from internal and it comes from adjacent spaces.
I think that's an interesting view because you're right. Innovation it's not linear. It's all over the place and it's bombarding you. And from that, you grow and you're being awakened to see new things and other things are coming in front of you that you hadn't expected. So if you're savvy, you embrace it.
That's right. That's right. You embrace it. You say, "Let's do it." It's a call to arms. It's not an, "Oh my goodness, they're asking for more." This is exciting because there's a lot of opportunity. And with that, the question is the what's in house. What is it that you can offer? And that, in terms of what that means, it really is going to come down to people because the excitement is having the folks that can figure these things out.
Interesting. I think that's really interesting because everyone's talking about how it's going to be technology that drives us forward. And I think technology, of course, is a very important tool. It's critical to be able to embrace technology. But I think that ultimately you need to have the people as well. So I'm very glad you touched upon that.
People develop and design technology, not the other way around,
Right.
or at least not yet. One of the things, one of the great joys about being in a manufacturing business is it's actually a people business, even with machinery and even with technology. And the more that we have technology, the more that we need people who think of how that technology, what is that technology, how is it deployed, but more importantly is what problems are we really solving? And so it really gets back to a little bit of design thinking and really clarifying and understanding what problems we're trying to solve, because technology does not solve all of them. It becomes a tool in our arsenal, but it's driven by people, it's designed by people, and at least for the time being, it really is going to be people that define our organizations and, again, how we show up to the marketplace.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, because I think that it's tempting to think that we could just get people are a blessing and a curse, right? On the one hand, of course, you need people, but on the other hand, sometimes it's very frustrating managing people. So oftentimes we think, oh, if we could just only use technology to get all of this done, it would be less expensive, it would be less problematic. But on the other hand, you do need that human touch, that aspect that only, at least up till now, human beings can bring.
Machines can make things more efficient, and machines can make things more productive, but those notions of making things more beautiful, not yet. And certainly the inability to be able to make things more meaningful. I think that the conceptual thought and strategic thinking that is required, the critical thinking, and then the what ifs. People can certainly come through different machinations of things, supercomputers, but I think that the joy and beauty of our industry is that you get to see, feel, and touch and understand that in that touch and that visualization. There's really some wonderful things, there's some magic that goes on.
So true. Only a human can bring the human element.
At least for now. we're replicating a lot in terms of all of it, but there's a lot of creativity that goes into all of it and a lot of great critical thinking. But I think that's what's going to differentiate this notion of people, even with technology. Again, people drive technology to solve problems, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical point. What are some of the unique services that you're offering through Lion Brothers? In other words, what might you say are your superpowers?
So, well, I can say our superpower is certainly we offer fantastic products that help people in lots of ways create brand value. They help in terms of mitigating financial risk, that help create flexibility. But I'd say our superpower is actually our people, which is our people are a blend of seasoned industry folks and young talent who blend together to create new innovations. We talked about understanding the problems our customers are trying to solve. Our folks love the challenge of creating new solutions around that. And the most satisfying sound is when our teams are presenting new trend releases and other things, and we hear, I love it, from a consumer. I think that's what we live for. The other superpower is these people work on innovation, things that are new, and that innovation is in areas such as digital manufacturing, about digitization, but how we think about things, frameworks of micro facilities, how we think about the future, how we live our values. I think there's a lot in there in terms of what our superpower is, but I would think that it revolves around people.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that the fact that you're able to look at this in such a comprehensive way and break it down into these components is really exciting. And it really shows us a roadmap of what the future can be of efficient manufacturing, but that also has a human element to it.
Absolutely. It's with design, but one of our superpowers is taking something that's a two-dimensional concept and actualizing it into a three-dimensional product that differentiates a garment and drives consumer preference and purchase, and do it in a way where there's technology that enables the whole process to occur. And there's something quite wonderful in that. And we've got a long way to go. I guess the good news is we're 120 years old. The good news is that it's a very fresh company for being so, for having this wonderful legacy.
Well, clearly you have built a solid foundation that served you through many different times. And I think that oftentimes, while there's nothing wrong with things that are new, I think that something that is 120 years old is obviously gone through the test of time through many different eras. So you have that resilience to be able to have survived for this many years, to survive and thrive.
Look, survival and thrive is what it's about. And I think there's this fundamental belief in quality of product and quality of relationship and all that it means. And that's through and through in terms of the heart of the place. And what I'm proud of is, on behalf of the organization, is the ability to have folks that are able to take that pivot and integrate it with thinking differently. And I look forward to just bringing more to market as time evolves.
It's really been so great talking to you, Susie, and I feel so energized listening to everything that you're doing. And I think that even through these very challenging times, when there's people like yourself and Lion Brothers who are innovating and looking for opportunity and continually evolving, it gives everybody a path that they could possibly follow.
Jane, thank you. We count our blessings, and we're very grateful. So it comes with a strong sense of pragmatism and humility. We've got lots of work to do, but we're just lots of good things for the future. So I'd say not just us, but everyone, just keep on doing, and we will get through this as an industry together.
Thank you so much, Susie. It's really been a pleasure. I wish you and everyone at Lion Brothers tremendous success.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives and entrepreneurs who share their insights, experiences, and future vision for business. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's SPINEXPO.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, our Q1 Current Situation and Sourcing Report is now available. Find out more in the show notes. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next episode.